Hello everyone and welcome to the 34th Daily Critique, where today I'm going to be discussing 5 images by Richard Fox. I've actually known Richard for some years now. He used to be a photographer on Dartmoor. He's recently moved up to Scotland, and these images are all from Scotland. I always liked his style on Dartmoor because he used to photograph pastoral landscapes and include buildings and so on, which many landscape photographers tend to avoid. So I certainly appreciate that in his work. And mostly this is going to just be a general critique. The standard of these images is pretty high. His editing is understated and tasteful, so it's not going to be earth-shattering in the kind of revelations in this critique. But nevertheless, we've got some nice images to look through, and we can discuss what's successful as much as critiquing everything. So let's get started. Here are the 5 images that Richard sent in, and I'm not exactly sure what he's hoping for from me because they all look pretty good to me, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So let's have a look through them in Photoshop, and I will try to use my red brush here as often as possible to keep him happy. But we'll start with this one. So a really nice Scottish glen image. It couldn't really be anywhere else in the world, and it captures the atmosphere of Scotland very well, with this band of rain coming through, producing a rainbow, and this lovely river flowing through the mountains. So it's pretty nicely arranged. Obviously, you've got the nice view down the valley here, and these two peaks counterbalance each other quite nicely. There's not perfect symmetry, but that's absolutely fine. And of course, the river naturally follows down the river, so that all ties together pretty well. And I think, were it not for the rainbow, Richard probably would have ended the frame somewhere here. But obviously he's gone a bit wider on the left to include as much of that rainbow as possible, which I think is the right call to make. And all in all, the composition ties together very well. Obviously, in an ideal world, it would be great if the river, for example, swung even stronger left to right like that. But the fact that it doesn't makes fairly little difference, really. And it's a really nice photo, well edited. Perhaps without any light on the foreground, it looks a little bit flat, but this is more or less how I would edit it myself. So I think he's done a pretty good job there too. And maybe I'd just bring a slightly bluer tone into the sky, but really nice shot that. Okay, so this one I appreciate, particularly because of the boaters there. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. If they're fishermen, then I can't see a rod, but yeah, obviously all out as a group enjoying this loch in the morning, in the autumn. And you see a lot of these photos, certainly in the UK, of deciduous trees intermingled with pine trees on an island, and often they're taken in the mist in the autumn, and they all look very much the same after a while. And I've seen plenty of island reflections on perfectly still days. So that in itself doesn't do much for me, but actually adding the human context really adds quite a lot, I think. Certainly makes me wonder what's going on there, and so I think it's a good use of that human element, because otherwise, to be honest, the shot would be a little bit boring. And having looked at Richard's edit, again, I would have gone very fractionally colder with the white balance. But other than that, I think he's done a really good job. So in terms of his actual edit, if we just flip back to Lightroom here, you can see that the original is a bit darker and less saturated. So he's brought in, well, let's very quickly zip through it. He's brightened the exposure, added some contrast, and then locally worked on this island. So if I just paint in an adjustment here, and then, for example, add some contrast and saturation, which hasn't done too much. Then add some more contrast here and darken the highlights and lift the shadows. And then we darken the exposure, and you kind of go back and forth with this, and you know, maybe darken the sky and the lake here, and make the white balance slightly bluer, I think. And then add vibrance and a bit of saturation, and it's that kind of approach anyway, and I think it's very well done. Yeah, he's added a bit more contrast there, but really nice edit, and a nice shot too. I guess in an ideal world, I'd like to have perhaps a sense of perspective from these boaters. I mean, even the closest pair here are not that different in scale to the most distant ones, and if there was more variation there, then maybe that would give the shot a bit more of a sense of depth, because things are quite linear and symmetrical. So maybe it would be nice to have that sense of perspective, but other than that, it's another nice image. Okay, so this is probably my favourite shot of the bunch, and that's partly because it plays into what I think Richard is best at, which is shooting these pastoral scenes, but also because it gives a different flavour to shots of Scotland that I see all too frequently and produce myself of wild mountain vistas, and I like this juxtaposition of the tamed landscape with the wild landscape, and particularly with this swathe of mist separating the two halves of the image. And of course the icing on the cake is the full moon, I assume rising or setting there. What would it be? I suppose I can't tell from this, but it's probably a setting moon actually at sunrise, I'm guessing. And yeah, it's just beautifully done, this image. Compositionally really excellent. I mean, I guess ideally there'd maybe be something a bit more interesting in this this foreground section, but I'm being really picky there, because I just think that this is a really lovely image. And in terms of the edit, I'd maybe just lift the foreground a bit more in terms of brightness. Maybe set a more of a white point there as well. Just to help it along its way, and bring out some more of the colour. It's a fine balancing act, that, and potentially you could just slightly darken the sky as well, like so. Keep drawing these gradients the wrong way around, and then a final curve just to set a white point. Yeah, so we're starting to clip the red channel on the sunlight portions of the hill behind there, and then the moon as well. So we want to be careful with that, but that still looks good to me actually, and maybe just dial that back a little bit, or locally mask the hill. But still, stunning shot that. Wow, just a great from a content perspective, and perfectly executed. I wish there were more photographers producing images like this. Okay, a bit more classical this, I guess, a hoarfrost mist, which gives that lovely separation between the tree in the foreground and the trees behind, and helps to filter the sun. And yeah, a lovely edit. Really nice mixture of warm and cool tones. So you can see in the grasses and on the right side of the image, more neutral, cold colours coming in, but around the sun, those lovely warm colours. So from a white balance perspective, that's very well handled. And so is the contrast and edit on the whole. I just think it's a really stunning image. If I have any criticism at all, it's just that it's a little bit of a trope. I have seen a few of these photos before, but I would shoot this in a heartbeat, particularly with this hoarfrost in the foreground. That is very beautiful indeed. So that's a lovely image there, Richard. And finally, onto this shot from Lochmarie, an area that I am very familiar with. This is one of the iconic trees along Lochmarie. It's really quite a picturesque Scots pine, and usually it's shot looking in sort of the opposite direction, looking across looking across this way, where a mountain called Slioch is. So that tree is usually used as the foreground element, because it's not too far from a car park. So I tend to avoid shooting this myself, but I have been here before with groups, and particularly when the weather has been bad. And I have to say, I think this way of shooting it is really great. The light is perfect. The edit is really excellent. In fact, the edit, I would just do exactly the same as this. and it's a really nice alternative view on this shot, and classic of Richard's style, really, that it is quite understated. He's not trying to show off here. He's not trying to show a beautiful tree and a crazy mountain behind. Instead, he's picked these two more gentle mountains. This one here is called Ben Ari Char. If you're British and you ever get the chance to hike up that one, it has a rather magnificent view. I go up there on my Great Wilderness trekking workshop every year that I run that one. But yeah, really great image, that, Richard. And so I've given you very little feedback there or ideas to build upon, but I suspect you expected that of me, because you know that I really do enjoy your work. But thank you very much for sending those in and letting me show them to everybody else.